Welcome to my garden. We're here to talk about pine. And before I get into talking about how to utilize pine in your life, I want to introduce myself as Maggie. I'm one of the educators at the Florida School of Holistic Living, and we are currently in my backyard here in Central Florida near Orlando, downtown Orlando. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for taking some time out of all the things that are going on in our world right now to talk about a plant that is a tree that grows all over the eastern coast of the United States, from Canada down to the southern parts of Florida. We have many species of pine in the Pinus, Pinus species, and in Central Florida we have a specific one that I want to talk about today, and that is the longleaf books that talk about white pine, which is not a pine variety that we have access to here in Central Florida. It's really from Canada down to Georgia. White pine medicinal uses. Make sure that if you have any questions as I'm talking, please go ahead and comment. Comment below if you have any comments or even questions. Go ahead and comment below. If you have questions moving forward, if you think about something later on, you can always email me at maggie@holisticlivingschool.org with any questions that you have. So we have the many species of pine here in Central Florida, and most of them can be used really interchangeably in the same way that you would read a lot about longleaf pine here in Central Florida. Peggy Lance is a true gem that we have here of different Florida incredible wild edible classes that she's been teaching for years, where she takes you out into the forest and you collect foods together. She talks about pine in this book, and she has a newer edition of this book that I'd like to highly recommend if you live in Florida and are interested in discovering some of the edibles that have been used in this area for a long time. Peggy talks about how our pine species can be used for food. Those pine cones, wonderful little seeds in them that you can eat either raw or toasted a little bit, thrown into salads. A side note on that is that those pine cones or the seeds from those pine cones are also food for a lot of the animals that live in our forests. So be really mindful of where you're collecting things. Peggy also talks about the leaves. And the leaves I will pick whenever I'm hiking out in the woods, just as a way to bring some vitamin C and refreshment into my mouth. They're a little bit astringent, so I get a drying sensation there.
We've cut in and out a couple times.
See it? Take a look at these leaves. Specifically by Peterson Guides, written by an herbalist named Stephen Foster. He really likes to highlight the medicinal qualities of the pine. A long history of being used for that wonderful vitamin C quality. There are tales of people dying of mysterious diseases on sea travel, and coming to complicated stories of people coming into lands and dying of mysterious illnesses that were caused by the lack of vitamin C in their lives. So pine can be a way of incorporating lots of vitamin C into your life and help you not get scurvy. That's one reason. Another reason is that we know that vitamin C can be really helpful in keeping our immune system really strong and helping us to fight off any pathogens we're being faced with. pine. The leaves are great for that tea. There are also recipes of using the sap, which is the nutrients that run down that pine tree, providing nutrients to the leaves. But there's also sap, or resin, that is caused by the tree having some type of wound. And that wound could be a lightning strike. When we're out on hikes, you often see a tree with a big open wound with lots of resin coming out. And that is the tree's own immune system trying to support the healing in the tree. And we as humans can benefit from those healing qualities of the resin. There are survival guides that will point you to using that resin straight from the pine tree for things like a lost crown or a cavity. You can with clean as measures as possible, you can use that for those cavities. The resin has also been used for a long time for things like salves or more intentional daily uses for inflammation caused by things like arthritis. So in a salve form, it can be used to alleviate some of the discomfort that you might feel in those joints. Some of you that grew up with a lot of pine around might have experienced using that resin as chewing gum. So you may have had an elder in your life that suggested just chewing on it. Well, that chewing can be nice and freshen the breath and help you to feel that freshness of having the gum in your mouth, but it also has some of the medicinal qualities as an antiseptic and help fighting off pathogens. These also has these astringent qualities, and that astringency can help you know that it has that really high vitamin C, and it can help tone as well. So some of the actions of pine are expectorant. It has a long history of use in the inner bark, being used in both tincture and decoction form to help the body overcome colds and flus. And when we're talking about pine, many of you have seen these beautiful, giant, fast-growing trees that have those big hunks of bark that make really good mulch. There are some, I've read some historical uses of the bark for medicine, but I've never personally used it, and I don't know anyone personally that has used it. But I do know that it makes really good mulch. Inside the twigs, or the younger twigs or branches, if you gently cut away the outer bark of those young twigs or branches, there's a white, fleshy, pulpy, kind of a starchy part of the bark that can be survival food. So if you find yourself in a situation where you need to find some calories in your body, you can use the inside of that. So outside of survival food, that inner bark has been used in tincture form, often with jen. And jen and juniper have its own medicinal qualities, but in this tincture form of the inner bark and tincture form has been found to really alleviate sore throat. So tinctures are concentrated herbal products where you have the plant material in a jar for a long period of time, and you strain it off. You strain it off and it becomes a portable medicine. So my dear friend made some chill out summer syrup. So one way to incorporate tinctures in your life could be in the form of sweetness. And this is a summer syrup that it used rose hips, which are also really high in vitamin C, and pine for their vitamin C qualities so that it becomes portable. So you'll notice in this video, I don't have a big pine tree in my backyard, unfortunately. They take up a lot of space. I certainly appreciate pine in my life, and I appreciate finding pine in nature. In fact, I went out on a hike this morning and lovingly gathered some pine needles. I just wanted to have a little side note on talking about working with pine or any well-crafted material. So if you're out and about, you see pine and it has all these wonderful needles. But just think about if you're taking them, if everyone that followed behind you took the same amount, what would happen to that beautiful pine tree? Would those hundreds of people that are visiting that city park just decimate the whole plant? So think about it whenever you are wildcrafting or taking plant materials about a few things. One is that you want to make sure you have permission. I can't just go to my city park and start collecting plant material without someone's permission because it's not really my land, it's everyone's and we're all to appreciate it. I also want to consider whether the plant material has been sprayed with anything that I don't really want in my body. So if I'm planning to chop this up and make a tea with it or consume the inner bark of those young twigs, I want to make sure that it hasn't been sprayed with a chemical that could make me sick. So make sure I have permission, make sure it doesn't have anything on it that could make me sick. And I also want to think about the sustainability. If I'm collecting from that plant, is it going to be lush and full and available to everyone else that might visit that location? And one way is to think about some herbalists or wildcrafters think about taking only 10%. So if I take 10% on public land that thousands of people visit every year, even if I have permission, if I take 10% and then other thousands of people also take 10%, that plant population would be extinct, basically, in that location. So make sure you're considering that, even if all the other requirements have been met. When we're talking about pine and we're talking about the resin coming from wounds in the tree, sometimes you'll hear about in survival books and even in my wonderful complete guide to edible wild plants that the Department of the Army put out that has some useful information on pine, it suggests wounding the tree yourself if you're trying to access the resin. Just remember that the tree is a living organism, and when you cut it, it's not that unlike you getting cut yourself. The veins of the tree happen on the outside. So this tree's standing there and it has all these veins that are running up to the top of the tree. If you're cutting it, you're cutting off access to those nutrients above wherever it's cut. If you cut all the way around the tree, you've just completely killed the tree. It has no way of getting those nutrients all the way to the top. So do that with a lot of mindfulness and make sure that if you are, that you have all the permission and all of the guidance necessary to make sure you're taking care of that tree. So pine. My favorite way of incorporating pine into our lives actually came from my now 9-year-old son. I really enjoy having pine needle tea. And pine needle tea can be wonderful in the winter as a hot beverage to soothe a sore throat or a congested cough, wet congested cough. But it can also be really nice actually during the summer. I really like to make pine needle tea during the summer, add a little bit of honey, and then pop them in the freezer and call it a popsicle. There are a lot of different popsicle molds out there that you can pick up, and some are plastic, others are stainless steel, and you can actually make a popsicle holder out of almost anything. Even this little jar could be a popsicle holder. I could Any jar that has straight sides can be put into the freezer. So I could pour my tea in here. I could put whatever I want to use as a popsicle stick in the top, throw it in the freezer, and then bam, I got a honkin' big popsicle to take with me wherever I want to be. But to make pine needle tea, I'm gathering the fresh green pine needles. The brown ones make really good mulch, but not, once they turn brown and they're all dried out, they lose a lot of their medicinal qualities. So for pine needle tea, I'm just getting the tippy tops all lined up so I can sometimes scissors are helpful on this. Maybe I might need to start at the other side. Yeah. And I'm chopping. Chopping is fun if you want to make it so that there's a lot more surface area, but you can also, it's less messy too. You can bunch it. So there's chopping, or you can simply muddle it. I like chopping, especially if I'm making honey. Pine needle honey is really delicious and can be a nice way to get a zap of vitamin C as well as the healing qualities of that honey into your life by the spoonful. This smells so good. And I'm just getting access to the plant qualities inside those plant cells. Pine by itself, high in vitamin C, nice astringent qualities that help with fighting off of any pathogens. It can also be really nice to add other plants to the pine needle tea that you want to balance it. So if I'm really going for cootie fighting, I could add some elderberries to make it a power-packed virus fighter. If I'm making the tea to bring to an event or something like that where we want to make sure everybody's fighting off the cooties. Or if I want to add something that's going to really help my nervous system, to help me to get into that place of being really solid and grounded, I might add some tulsi or holy basil, or I might add some lemon balm to accentuate some of that tart, lemony quality of the vitamin C experience of having pine. And I'm adding lemon balm because this is one of my son's favorite ways of having pine. And you're typically with dried herb, it's a total of 1 teaspoon per cup. With fresh plant material, it's 1 to 3 tablespoons per cup. And you can see in here, it looks like I have a lot more plant material, but really it's that the pine is floating around in there. I add my water. I have hot water from my kettle. And then I cover it and let it steep for about 15 to 20 minutes. And it'll have this beautiful green color already. And this will be really nice, either hot when it's ready, or it will be nice chilled and I can bring it with me to an events. If you have any questions, please do comment below. If you use pine in your life, how do you use it? Do you remember chewing gum, pine sap resin gum when you were a kid? Tell us about it in the comments.
Remind them that you're going to post the video later.
So thank you for joining us for a talk about pine. We talked about how the seeds are edible, raw or roasted. We talked about the use as a survival food. We talked about how the leaves make a really lovely tea or popsicles later on. Super high in vitamin C. There's a question?
What can I do to keep my pine tree healthy?
So there was a question about keeping a pine tree healthy. And our longleaf pine really likes to be in Florida sandy soil. It likes a little more acidity. If you let some of the pine needles stick around at the bottom of the tree, you'll have that nice acidity that they really like. As far as growing pine trees, they prefer fields or meadows. If you'll notice, you can see how tall they can get. They really like to be able to have that space to get really tall really quickly. So they wouldn't do well in a muddy space where they didn't have that kind of room to grow. They like to be able to dry out. They like the sandy soil. And the varieties that grow further north of here, you will find them in places that are similarly soil qualities, sandy soil or clay soil, so that it has the ability to drain. It doesn't want to sit in a lot of water. It wants the water to really be able to drain away. Thank you for being here and talking about pine. Hope you enjoy your pine needle tea